I never thought a family photo album could start a war, but I clearly underestimated my mother-in-law, Barbara. Looking back, the signs were there from the moment I married her son, David, 3 years ago. She'd removed every wedding photo from her walls the day I moved in, claiming she was redecorating. I should have known then that my past would always be a problem for her. I'd been widowed at 29 when my first husband, James, died in a car accident. After 2 years of grief and healing, I met David. He was kind, understanding, and never felt threatened by the fact that I'd loved before. His mother, however, was a different story. A proper wife, Barbara would say at family gatherings, saves herself for one man. She'd say this while staring directly at me, usually over her third glass of wine. David would squeeze my hand under the table, silently apologizing for his mother's behavior, but never actually confronting her. When Barbara's 60th birthday approached, I saw it as an opportunity to finally bridge the gap between us. I'd spent the past 5 years watching her systematically erase my history from family conversations. Maybe as she could see our whole family story laid out in pictures, she'd understand that my past made me who I am today, the woman who loves her son. I spent 2 weeks collecting photos from everyone in the family. David's sister Emma provided childhood pictures. His Aunt Mary had beautiful shots from family vacations. I even found old black and white photos of Barbara as a young mother, looking at David with such pure love it made my heart ache. Then came the difficult decision. Should I include photos from my life before David? The pictures with James were part of my story. My first marriage wasn't some shameful secret. It was 4 years of love that ended in tragedy. After much contemplation, I included 3 photos. My favorite picture of James and me at our best friend's wedding, a group shot from our honeymoon with friends who were still part of my life, and one of James with his arm around my shoulders at my graduate school graduation. The album was beautiful when finished. I'd arranged everything chronologically, starting with Barbara's childhood, through her marriage, the birth of her children, and then expanding to include the families her children created, including mine. Each photo had a handwritten caption explaining its significance. I even left empty pages at the end titled Future Memories, hoping we'd fill them together as a family. The party was at Barbara's house, of course. She'd never let anyone else host her celebrations. I arrived early to help set up, carrying the wrapped album like it was made of glass. David kept telling me how proud he was of my effort to connect with his mother. "This will mean so much to her," he said, helping me arrange the gift table. Mom loves family history. The party started well enough. Barbara held court in her favorite armchair, accepting gifts and compliments with equal enthusiasm. When she opened my gift, her initial reaction was promising. "Oh, how lovely," she cooed, running her hands over the leather cover. A family album. Then she started turning pages. I watched her face change as she moved through the chronology. Her smile grew tight at the photos from David's first marriage. She'd never liked his ex-wife either, I realized suddenly. But when she reached the pages with James, everything imploded. "What is this?" Her voice cut through the party chatter like a knife. "Who are these people?" The room went quiet. David stepped forward. "Mom." But Barbara was already standing, album clutched in her manicured hands. "I asked you a question, Amanda. Who is this man with his arms around you?" I kept my voice steady, despite my pounding heart. "That's James, my late husband. Those photos are part of my history, part of who I am. Part of who you are." Barbara's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Part of our family history." She strode to the fireplace, the focal point of her perfectly decorated living room. Without breaking eye contact with me, she tossed the album into the flames. "My son's the only man who belongs in our family photos," she declared. "I won't have my grandchildren confused about their heritage by some other man's pictures." The room erupted in gasps. Emma rushed forward to try salvaging the album, but it was too late. The leather cover was already curling in the heat. "Mom." David's voice cracked with shock. "Do you know how long Amanda worked on that?" 2 weeks, I said quietly, reaching for my phone. "I spent 2 weeks putting together your mother's history. But that's okay, Barbara. Because while I was collecting all those photos, I found something interesting. Something from 15 years ago that I think everyone here should see." Barbara's face went pale. She knew exactly what I was talking about. The photo she tried to make everyone forget. The one that proved she wasn't always so concerned about proper marriages and family purity. "Amanda, don't," she whispered. But I'd spent 3 years being quiet. 3 years watching her systematically try to erase my past while pretending her own was spotless. The burning album was the last straw. I turned to the gathered family members who were watching this drama unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. Would anyone like to see Barbara's first wedding? The one she had 6 months before marrying David's father. The silence in the room was deafening. Barbara's perfectly arranged birthday party was about to become something else entirely. A lesson in the danger of trying to erase the past. The photo on my phone screen showed a much younger Barbara, beaming in a white dress next to a man who wasn't David's father. The date stamp read June 15, 1982. David's parents' wedding certificate, which hung prominently in their hallway, was dated January 8, 1983. That's impossible, Emma whispered, leaning closer to see the photo. Mom, who was that? Barbara's face had lost all color. She gripped the mantle of the fireplace where my album was still burning. Where did you get that? It was in your sister Mary's old photo boxes, I said calmly. Along with the wedding announcement from the local newspaper, you were married to Robert Thompson for exactly 4 months before having it annulled. Then you married David's father without ever telling him about your first marriage. The room erupted in murmurs. Aunt Mary, who had been quietly sipping her wine in the corner, suddenly found her shoes very interesting. That was different. Barbara's voice shook. I was young and foolish. It was a mistake that never should have happened. Like my marriage to James was a mistake. I stepped closer, my voice low but clear. The difference is, I don't hide my past. I loved James, and losing him nearly destroyed me. But that love, that loss, it made me who I am. The woman your son fell in love with. David moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. Mom, how could you never tell us about this? Because it wasn't important. Barbara's voice rose hysterically. I was barely 20. Robert turned out to be a drunk who gambled away our rent money. Your father saved me from that mistake. He gave me a real marriage, a real family. And James gave me 4 beautiful years before a drunk driver took him away, I countered. But you've spent 3 years treating me like I'm damaged goods because I loved before David. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Barbara, who'd spent years preaching about proper wives and pure family histories, had her own secret first marriage. Every Sunday dinner, I continued, you make little comments about how a woman should only have one love. Every Christmas, you conveniently lose the ornaments my first family gave me. You even told your bridge club I was divorced rather than admit I was widowed because it sounded better. Tears streamed down Barbara's face now, smearing her perfect makeup. I was protecting our family image. No, David interrupted, his voice firm. You were protecting your image, Mom, and you've been hurting Amanda in the process. Emma stepped forward, placing a hand on her mother's shoulder. Mom, do you remember what you told me when I was thinking about leaving Jack last year? You said everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Isn't that exactly what Amanda found with David? Barbara sank into her armchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The carefully maintained facade of family perfection she built over decades was crumbling around her. I spent 15 years, she whispered, making sure no one knew about Robert. I thought if I could just erase that part of my life, be perfect enough, proper enough. She looked up at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. And then you came along, so open about your past, so unashamed. Because I have nothing to be ashamed of, I said softly, and neither do you, Barbara. First marriages, lost loves, they're not shameful secrets, they're chapters in our stories. The photo album in the fireplace had burned to ashes now, but somehow the tension in the room had shifted. Barbara's perfect birthday party had turned into something raw and real. I have copies, I said quietly, of all the photos, even the ones of Robert Thompson, because erasing the past doesn't make it disappear. It just makes the present feel hollow. Barbara stood slowly, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She looked around at her family, at the faces showing shock, disappointment, and most surprisingly, understanding. I suppose, she said carefully, we could start working on a new album. One that tells the whole story this time. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Barbara, it was seismic. 3 years of hostility were beginning to crack, revealing something that looked almost like hope. David squeezed my hand. I think that's a wonderful idea, Mom. And maybe this time we could all help put it together. As the party guests began to awkwardly disperse, Barbara caught my arm. Her grip was gentle, nothing like her usual commanding grasp. "That photo," she said softly. "The one of you and James at your graduation. Do you have another copy?" A week after the birthday party disaster, I found myself sitting at Barbara's kitchen table, surrounded by photo boxes and albums. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating decades of memories spread across the polished oak surface. "I kept everything," Barbara admitted, pulling out a yellowed envelope from the bottom of a box, even though I pretended it never happened. Inside were photos from her brief first marriage, moments of young love frozen in time. I recognized the hopeful smile she wore in those pictures. It was the same one I had in my photos with James. "Why did you really hide these all these years?" Barbara's hands trembled as she sorted through the images. "When I met David's father, he was everything Robert wasn't: stable, responsible, devoted. I was so afraid that if he knew about my failed marriage, he'd see me differently. Then the longer I kept it secret, the harder it became to tell the truth. And that's why my openness about James bothered you so much," I realized, "because I was doing what you couldn't." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Every time you spoke about James with such love and honesty, it reminded me of my own cowardice. It was easier to try to silence you than face my own shame." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, organizing photos chronologically. When we reached the pictures from my first marriage, Barbara paused. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "About James. I've spent so long trying not to hear his name, I never really listened." So I told her. About James's terrible jokes and his passion for teaching. About how he could never remember to put the cap back on the toothpaste, but always remembered to bring me coffee in bed. About the night we lost him, and how learning to live again didn't mean loving him less. "And then I met David," I finished, "who understood that loving James made me capable of loving him too." Barbara wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I've been so wrong, Amanda. About everything." She reached into another box and pulled out a small photo album I'd never seen before. "These are from my first wedding day. Robert may have been a mistake, but he taught me what I didn't want in a marriage." That knowledge led me to David's father. As we worked together creating a new family album, something shifted between us. The walls of perfectionism and pretense began to crumble, replaced by something real and raw and honest. David found us there hours later, surrounded by photos and sharing stories we'd never dared tell before. He stood in the doorway, watching his mother and wife finally finding common ground in their shared experiences of love and loss. "Mom," he said, picking up a photo of Barbara in her first wedding dress, "you look beautiful here. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Barbara looked at her son, really looked at him. "Because I thought you'd think less of me, just like I made Amanda feel about her past." "I was so wrong, sweetheart." David pulled up a chair, joining us at the table. "You know, Dad would have understood. He always said what he loved most about you was your capacity to love deeply." The new album took shape under our hands. Not a sanitized version of family history, but a true one. Barbara's first wedding photos shared pages with pictures of James. Happy moments, sad moments, all the pieces that made us who we are. When we finished, Barbara ran her fingers over the cover. "I think," she said slowly, "we should show this at Sunday dinner. The whole family should know our real story." 2 days later, I found a package on my doorstep. Inside was a familiar pearl necklace. Barbara's prized family heirloom that she'd always said would only go to a proper daughter-in-law. The note read, "For my daughter-in-law, who taught me that our past loves don't diminish our present ones, they prepare us for them. Love, Barbara." That Sunday, as our family gathered around Barbara's dining table, she stood and showed everyone the new album. There were gasps of surprise, tears, and finally, understanding. We were all human, all carrying our histories, all worthy of love. To new beginnings, Barbara raised her glass, looking directly at me, and to old loves that shaped us. I touched the pearls at my neck and smiled, thinking how sometimes the most beautiful things come from moments of breaking, like a family photo album burned to ashes only to rise again more complete, more honest, more real. Because in the end, it's not about erasing our past. It's about embracing how it led us to our present. And as I sat there, surrounded by my blended family, I knew that every love story, first, last, or in between, deserves to be remembered.